The world watched in disbelief as newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump announced a halt to U.S. funding for tuberculosis programs in developing nations. This decision, announced on January 20, 2025, sent shockwaves through the global health community. The move is part of a larger freeze on U.S. aid and funding. Experts warn that this decision will have dire consequences, particularly for countries grappling with a high burden of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, a contagious bacterial infection, primarily affects the lungs. It is a leading cause of death worldwide, particularly in low-income countries. The U.S. has been a long-standing contributor to global TB control efforts, providing funding for medications, research, and healthcare infrastructure. This sudden withdrawal of support has left many questioning the future of the fight against TB. The impact of this decision is far-reaching. Developing nations rely heavily on U.S. funding to combat tuberculosis. Without access to affordable medications and healthcare resources, the incidence of TB is likely to surge. This decision undermines decades of progress in global TB control and puts millions of lives at risk. Indonesia, a nation grappling with the second highest TB burden globally, finds itself in a particularly vulnerable position. The archipelago has been making strides in its fight against the disease, but the recent U.S. funding cut poses a significant setback. Local health experts have expressed deep concern over the potential consequences of this decision. Dr. Nurul Luntungan, chair of the Stop TB Partnership Indonesia, STPI, called the move a major setback in the global fight against TB. She emphasized the significant progress Indonesia has made in recent years and the devastating impact this funding cut could have on these efforts. Dr. Henry Diatmo, executive director of STPI, echoed these concerns. He warned that halting access to vital TB medications could derail the UN and HU's goal of eliminating TB by 2030. Dr. Diatmo stated that this decision feels like sabotage to their ongoing efforts to combat TB in Indonesia. The Indonesian government, led by President Joko Widodo, has prioritized tackling TB. The impact of this funding cut on their plans is unclear but potentially devastating. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has played a crucial role in supporting global health programs for decades. Through USAID, the U.S. has provided billions of dollars in funding to combat infectious diseases, including tuberculosis. This funding has been instrumental in providing access to life-saving medications, improving healthcare infrastructure, and strengthening disease surveillance systems. USAID's work has been particularly impactful in developing nations like Indonesia. The agency has partnered with local organizations and government agencies to implement comprehensive TB control programs. These programs have focused on increasing access to diagnosis, ensuring a consistent supply of medications, and providing support for patients undergoing treatment. The recent funding freeze imposed by President Trump has brought USAID's operations to a grinding halt. Projects have been put on hold, partnerships are in jeopardy, and the future of many life-saving programs hangs in the balance. The impact of this decision is being felt across the globe as countries struggle to fill the funding gap left by the U.S. Section 4. Politics over Public Health, Decoding the Motivation. The decision to halt tuberculosis funding has been met with widespread condemnation from the global health community. Many experts believe that this move is politically motivated, with little regard for the devastating consequences it will have on vulnerable populations. Some speculate that the decision is part of President Trump's America First agenda, prioritizing domestic interests over international aid. Others believe it is a tactic to appease his base, who have consistently called for reductions in foreign aid. Regardless of the motivation, the decision to prioritize politics over public health is deeply concerning. Critics argue that this decision undermines America's standing as a global leader in health and development. The U.S. has long been a champion for global health security, recognizing that infectious diseases know no borders. This decision sends a dangerous message to the world, signaling a retreat from global cooperation and a disregard for the well-being of vulnerable populations. Section 5. A Call for Unity. The fight against tuberculosis continues. Despite this setback, the fight against tuberculosis must continue. The global health community must come together to address the funding gap left by the U.S. and ensure that life-saving programs can continue. This requires a concerted effort from governments, international organizations, and civil society. Indonesia, along with other affected nations, must explore alternative funding sources and strengthen domestic resource mobilization for tuberculosis control. This includes increasing government spending on healthcare, exploring innovative financing mechanisms, and engaging the private sector in supporting tuberculosis programs. The international community must hold President Trump accountable for this short-sighted decision and urge him to reconsider. The fight against tuberculosis is far from over, and the consequences of inaction are too great to ignore. Global solidarity is essential to protect the health and well-being of all people, regardless of where they live.